Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina
and Torsten.
Two historians.
And friends.
And lovers.
Of romantic comedies.
And this is the podcast in which we answer the age-old question.
Will they or won't they?
Is this or isn't it a romantic comedy?
Technically, that's two questions.
Yeah, I feel like we've only done films where it's pretty clear it's a romantic comedy.
We should do films where it's not clear that it's a romantic comedy. And then the questions will finally make sense. And then we'll get rid of the questions. I think that's the way it's going to go.
Cool.
Yeah, so what are we doing today?
The Holiday, which is unfortunately definitely a romantic comedy. So, but it's Christmas, everybody. Tis the damn season. The Holiday, 2006, written and directed by Nancy Meyers.
Which means it features kitchens. Multiple.
Yeah, although I have to say, this is the least kitchen-heavy Nancy Meyers, I want to say, because, in Something's Gotta Give, they have a very important moment in the kitchen, and in which we haven't done what we should do. It's complicated. She's literally, Meryl Streep's character is, has her own, bakery, deli kind of thing. So, there's a lot of talk about her cooking and the kitchen. I think in this one, I don't think Cameron Diaz cooks. She's very rich, and Kate Winslet just tries to kill herself in the kitchen.
I mean, so the kitchen features also the kitchen that Kate Winslet tries to kill herself, which, by the way, we need to talk about that. That's just a weird throwaway thing to put in a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
Also is the kitchen in which then Cameron Diaz and Jude Law are making coffee. And I noted down that when that happens, that's the British country home version of a Nancy Meyers kitchen, which is much smaller and much cozier, but still very, very well appointed with the coffee cups on display and all that kind of stuff. So it's still a fantasy kitchen, even though it's small.
Yeah. But Cameron Diaz's house and the cottage at the same time are both house goals. So I think the Nancy Meyers interior thing is it's not just a kitchen this time. It's definitely a whole thing.
We should talk about what this movie is actually about for the probably 3.5 people who haven't seen it.
I think that's our whole listenership who've probably all seen it. But anyway, it's Cameron Diaz and Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet is a very depressed British woman who works for a newspaper.
I think that's the great definition. That is her character. She's written by an American and is basically a very depressed British woman.
She's hung up on this asshole who's emotionally unavailable asshole who's getting married to someone else. And Cameron Diaz is an editor. She cuts trailers for big movies.
Everyone's an editor of some kind in this.
And she obviously is a Hollywood mainstay. She lives in a very, very fancy villa in LA. She breaks up with her boyfriend because it turns out he cheated on her with his secretary, assistant, whatever. And so they're both depressed. It's right before Christmas, I think literally the day before or something.
No, I looked this up when they're on the plane. When Kate Winslet's on the plane, the BlackBerry shows December 18th. So that's where we are. A week
but it's
before
sort
Christmas.
of when everyone is starting to head off their jobs and into the holiday. That's sort of that window, I think, because they also need a few more days for the plot to actually unfold. I think is the reasoning also. And they end up randomly connecting via house swap portal because apparently Kate Winslet has her little cottage in Surrey up in this platform anyway. Probably wasn't expecting anything to happen, and Cameron Diaz just on a whim because everything is so shit, sort of types in where could I go? Where do they speak my language? England.
Brilliant scene. Where do they speak English? Looks at all the little flags, and it's Estonia, England. Click.
And then they chat, and then immediately start decide to swap houses and essentially fly out the next day, the same day, depending on time zones, I think. And then that's that. And then obviously everything hijinks ensue, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of
hijinks.
There is a lot of people in this movie who are having a really good year. The assistants Cameron Diaz's assistants are Catherine Hahn and John Krasinski, who are both like 2024 is both of their year, I'd say. And there's a bunch of other kind of minor actors who are really either kind of old school mainstays like Eli Wallach, or just people that you've seen in something else, like in partially like tiny roles, which is really fun.
I mean, we need to talk about Eli Wallach because I think he's like easily the most endearing person ever on the screen. Like of everything I've seen, like if I had to pick one character who's like flawless, it's just Eli Wallach in The Holiday. And then the love interest, obviously Jude Law, who is Kate Winslet's brother, who ends up falling in love with Cameron Diaz's character. And then Jack Black, who is a composer, film music composer, who's a colleague of Cameron Diaz's ex. And then that's how he ends up running into like Kate Winslet after the house swap thing. But how they both meet their men is they're just delivered to their front door.
I mean, that's the ultimate fantasy. This is what I wrote down, right? Like this movie is
don't even have to
fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go halfway across the world.
Yeah, but like then you don't have to leave the house ever.
Yeah. Which is like, it's really like go to a place that is new and exciting or cozy and comfortable for you, close the door, and love will happen.
Yeah, I mean I'm here for it. I think I'm always torn between the two spaces, but I think I want the villa in LA and meet the film composer. And Eli Wallach,
I would go
especially.
for the cottage. I would definitely go for the cottage.
Oh no, but like I want to hang out with like screenwriting legend Eli Wallach. Come on. Also, Jack Black is kind of actually also the perfect man in this film, even though unfortunately Jack Black in private life managed to ruin his own massively amazing reputation this year. So speaking of people who sort of had a decade and then ruined it in 2024, that's
ruined. It's like it's a very specific point of view. Like from our point of view, but I think there's like billions and millions of people who just don't care.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here.
But there was a lot of like social media discourse, at least about how like he managed that's what I mean. To tarnish his reputation.
If you're extremely online, then yes. If you're just a regular person, then you don't know about this.
But I mean, for this movie, it is that there's been, especially after, I mean, there was always a lot of talk about Jude Law's character, so there's also like a clear female fantasy, like he's a widower who's great with his little girls, and he does things like Mr. Napkinhead, and he's very in touch with his emotions, even though he sort of fucks around a lot, but like, we get the idea that...
It's a weird character. It's such a weird, because he meets Cameron, he drunkenly stumbles into his sister's cottage, where now Cameron Diaz resides, and then basically they end up having sex, and like it's in a cute way. Like it's really kind of like a very romantic, again idealized fantasy version of like a man just stumbles through your door, and then when they first kiss, he says she says oh, I've never really kissed a stranger before, and he says I do it all the time, which is a weird thing if you then figure out what the rest of his life is like.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of makes sense because then you can sort of get the idea that he's like a ladies' man, but his reason for it essentially is that because his wife died and he doesn't want to introduce some random woman to his little daughters who are like, I don't know, one of them is maybe 4 or 5 and the other one is 7, 8, I want to say. I don't know if they ever say this, but
I honestly don't know, but they're like the most adorable British children that you've ever seen.
Very young. And then, so yeah, we get sort of this thing of like, yeah, obviously he wants to be a town, but like he hasn't really fallen in love again with anyone since his wife, which is another big, especially Christmas movie trope, right? There's always someone who lost their partner.
Yeah, the whole...
Including in Hot Frosty, which
is the one we're going to do next. Yeah.
And I think like Kate Winslet's character is so relatable because like she's hung up, she's in this situationship essentially. Like this is the movie about situationships before the word was invented, I think, because this movie is rapidly approaching 20 years now.
18, yeah, crazy.
Yeah. And he's the ultimate fuckboy. Like they had a thing, like this guy Jasper, like they had a thing for, obviously it wasn't very committed, but she was super into him, as she also admits. Like she was really, really in love with him, and like And they essentially just had a fling, and he never clearly, like, but he, liked her or anything, but, like, he clearly knows that she's super into him and is exploiting that at every turn. Like, he just likes the attention. He also uses her to, like, edit his manuscript at some point in the film and this kind of thing. Even though, like, he left her, I think, for the woman he'd end up marrying in this, like, announces the marriage at the same Christmas party.
Which is so weird. Like, this is the thing, like, okay, maybe we just don't have, like, print media anymore the way we used to 20 years ago. But if you work at the Daily Telegraph, apparently there's going to be a huge Christmas party for everyone. And then your, like, editor-in-chief just announces who is going to get married in front of everyone. It's a weird conceit.
Because both of the people work there, right, is the point. Like, they met on the job and he's marrying, so I think it makes sense. I mean...
Yeah, I don't know. It's still a weird thing. Like, it's like, okay, like, you can tell people, but, like, basically, like, clinging the glasses at the Christmas party. And, like, and these two are getting married. I don't know. It's...
Yeah, I mean, it's also, like, supposed to be the extra blow because she's the one who writes, like, the wedding section, like, the wedding announcements and engagement announcements.
Which also relatable that she's the only one who hasn't finished her work and then has to go back and and finish it.
And I mean, she definitely calls herself pathetic because she's just hung up on this, like, asshole. And then just when he starts flirting with her again, essentially is when he announces he will marry someone else. And she finally realizes she needs to get away from him and get over him. And in this case, the physical distance is, like, a big factor. And also just meeting other people and, like, getting out of this, like, probably daily life of just, like, commuting from her little cottage in Surrey into London to work at this newspaper and go back home and, like, live the single life. Like, we feel like she has a colleague she's clearly friendly with, but she otherwise seems fairly isolated, I think. I mean, her brother obviously exists, but, like, her brother's a widower now and, like, probably has his own issues, clearly, so...
Yeah, we don't really see her life in anything, really. Like, we see her at work, and then we see her crying at her cottage, her ideal cottage, and that's really it. Like, the rest of her life in London, we have no idea about.
Yeah, it just feels like very single woman, career woman kind of thing, who probably wanted to be a fancier writer or journalist, but ends up writing the wedding column for, like, a mid-sized
How to Lose a Guy in 10 days style.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think we don't find out more at this point because, I mean, she defines herself over this, like, situationship with this asshole. But also, if we were to learn about her brother and her nieces and so on, like, this would spoil, like, what's to come, obviously. So, but I think later we can sort of fill in the gaps. I mean, this means she lost her sister-in-law. That means, like, she's probably also taking care of these nieces a lot, let's face it. And, like, that's probably her life, and has been her life for the last few years. But yeah, so, she goes to LA, and the one person, like, she also meets Jack Black delivered to her front door, which is convenient. Who's also dating someone else at the point because he
is not Parker Posey, who I thought that was Parker Posey at first. I don't know why. Maybe the haircut.
But also dates someone who's sort of the female equivalent of this Jasper guy, like this actress he's completely smitten with, and she's clearly just coasting through and ends up also cheating on him later on in the film. And so they have very shared issues, but they meet as friends, but this is a clear thing of, like, well, you're also dating the wrong person. But that means, like, this isn't immediately falling into a romance plot the way Jude Law and Cameron Diaz are. It's actually more important that she first also meets Eli Wallach's character, who's a veteran screenwriter, old Hollywood, who lives next door and clearly has dementia, and it's like they run into each other because he can't remember where his house is.
Yeah, he says when he moved there were only 6 houses on the block, and they keep tearing down houses, and now he can't recognize any anymore.
His own neighborhood, which I think is his whole struggle. Like, he's clearly stuck in the past also because he too is a widower, obviously at an age where more people are widowers, but, like, clearly when his wife died, a lot of his life also just went away. Like, he he still lives by himself. So he probably can't fully handle it anymore. I mean, he clearly has enough money that he probably has some kind of carer too. But yeah, he's lonely. And so Kate Winslet like latches onto him, and he's at first weirded out by the fact that such a young woman would want to hang out with him. But they kind of need each other, I think, and he teaches her a lot about gumption and.
Yeah, and she kind of gets him out of his shell. They both kind of get each other out of their own shells. Like the storyline, I always thought that the storyline for Cameron Diaz is that she kind of like finds a less complicated life, right? She finds kind of like the things that matter to her, whereas Kate Winslet finds kind of herself again. She emerges out of her shell. She's meeting people. Like most of the Kate Winslet plot is her making friends, and she specifically did not have friends in London that we've seen. So this is really a real important part of the whole storyline, is that she meets Eli Wallach and she meets like his friends, and then Jack Black hangs out with them. That's most of the plot line. Like the romance subplot is kind of there, but it really only emerges towards the end of the movie.
I think it's there's almost like the other romance is Eli Wallach and Kate Winslet in a platonic way, obviously, but they bring each other, like it's the When Harry Met Sally thing also of like she needs to figure out herself for this to work, just like Cameron Diaz does too. Like Kate Winslet just doesn't have any self-esteem and she doesn't trust herself, and she and this guy has not helped that. And Eli Wallach immediately is like, well, in movies, there's the female lead, like the heroine, and there's the best friend. So why are you behaving like the best friend in your own life? And she's like, well, you just nailed the thing that my therapist has not been able to like articulate this way. And and Cameron Diaz clearly has a lot of self-esteem. Like she's great at her job and she believes in herself, which I think is also great to see, but she's more emotionally stunted. Like she has had issues because her parents got divorced.
Yeah, that's like the big, and it's kind of like one of those things where on the one hand, like kudos to Nancy Meyers for making that like a character arc, but also like exactly that the character arc is coming when she says I cannot cry, and I'm like, okay, we know where this is going. Obviously she has to like access her emotions. It's on the one hand, again, like it's kind of, it's tropey, but on the other hand, it kind of works for her character arc, so I'm fine with it.
I think the tropes also work because occasionally, like, they're gender reversed. Like, she's the emotionally stunted, whereas Jude Law is actually the guy who's very in touch with his emotions and can cry, even though clearly he has also suffered trauma because his wife passed away. But, like, that is sort of the contrast where he's like, oh, I'm a major weeper. Like, I weep at everything, And seeing like Jack Black as a man also being stuck in this like weird situationship with this woman, and it's like,
it's really interesting. What I really wondered about why this movie, because like I watched it again, and basically I have no notes. I mean, I have small notes on like some specifics of it, but like the overall storyline, I'm completely fine with it. The pacing, I'm completely fine with it, and the interesting thing is that there aren't that many movies which basically tell two stories, right? There's movies that tell one story, like a big story and like a B story. There's movies that tell multiple stories that usually then all come together. There's very few movies that tell two equal stories. And what kind of Nancy Meyers manages to do by doing that is she centers two female protagonists in a romantic comedy. Those are the most important characters. And usually in a rom-com, you have like typically, like the male and the female protagonists, and they both kind of get equal screen time, and they're both equally as developed and important if you do it right. And in this one, basically those two female protagonists are the most important people in the movie, which is also why they're first built. Like it's Diaz and Winslet, and then it's Jude Law and Jack Black. It's not the two couples kind of next to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they managed to develop the man in like smart ways, because like as soon as he has little kids, it gives you a lot. But like again, we focus on them the whole time. I mean, Jack Black just gets a lot of like charming moments of like singing movie scores, and this is still a time when you rent DVDs. and don't just dream movies, which is also fun to see because again, this is 18 years old. And Dustin Hoffman has his cameo because I mean it's LA,
which is completely gratuitous, but it's cute. So yeah.
And yeah, I think. Yeah, you're right. It's very female focused. I think like it's complicated. Like it's also very focused on Meryl Streep, even though there's like love triangles, but like we care less about them in a way. It's really about her figuring herself out, which I think Nancy Meyers is good at, and also has that sort of Nora Ephron touch of like we want to care about the characters developing, and in this case we want to focus on the women. And it's the only time she actually has younger protagonists, right? Because like normally her thing has been working with like older protagonists. Again, like
I don't know all her movies, but like typically, right? Yeah.
Like in the proper rom-coms, at least, like she, I think, what did she do? Father of the Bride, actually, like those, but that's also focused on like older protagonists for the time. But like,
that's not really a rom-com in the traditional sense.
No, exactly. But like once she does rom-coms, it's like Diane Keaton, it's Meryl Streep, it's Steve Martin, like it's just older people. Yeah, I mean, I think The Holiday is just like, I mean, it's clearly one of those movies that people come back to every season. I certainly have. Like for a time I watched this every Christmas. I mean, in the last few years there might have been a year I skipped for some reason because I was very depressed and just didn't watch anything. But like most of the time I've watched this, like for a while I watched this with my best friend while we're still teenagers, because again this is oldish by now. Like not old, but like old enough that I was a teenager. We watched this. I think this was the one, like, we watched this at a Christmas movie night, and then for the longest time, I always watched this, I think, randomly December 26th. Like, I saved that one for December 26th. Probably because it's, like, less focused on, like, Christmas Eve and more in the season, and then it also ends at New Year's, which is sort of which I also think is a nice thing, because, like, New Year's, like, unless we're talking the horrible film New Year's Eve, like, it's sort of left out of this, right? It's always leading up to Christmas, and this is where the Christmas movie narrative stops, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of...
Except sometimes New Year's Eve is obviously kind of like the big dramatic point, like it is in When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah, but like for the seasonal, like, holiday movies, if we're talking like Hallmark or like the Netflix equivalent, like New Year's Eve is just like... And it's this nice kind of hint towards there is a future for the couples, right? Like the culmination of like when Jack Black and Kate Winslet finally get their shit together, essentially. He's like, so what are you doing New Year's Eve? And she's like, well, I'm back in England. And he's like, well, I've never been to England. And then he comes and whereas like Cameron Diaz wants to go home, and then she goes back and it's like, well, it's kind of silly of me to, like, want to leave before New Year's. Like, clearly, like, this is just the flight they had booked, right, for the home swap, because Kate Winslet wants to be back with, like, her brother and nieces for New Year's, presumably. But, like, she's like, why do I leave? Like, clearly she's someone who flies, like, business, first class anyway. She can change her fucking flight.
And she already has before, right? There's the precedent, like, after she basically gets there, and then... This is the part that I never quite completely understood motivationally, why she immediately then says, like, oh no, I need to go back. And then she kind of almost does, but then doesn't after she's met Jude Law. But yeah, like, we know that she can just do this, and then she does. And it's kind of a nice deconstruction of these artificial deadlines that we sometimes impose in these movies. Oh, I've booked a flight. I can never unbook the flight and change it. I cannot pay the, $80 changing fee for my...
Again, like, if you fly business, there's no fucking
nobody cares. Nobody cares.
But but also I think it fits her character also, just like, oh God, what have I done? Like, let's just go back home. I'm being silly, I think, is sort of why that happens. It's like her sort of like... Yeah. What am I doing here? Like, what is this? Like, this is bullshit. I should just go back home and do my work, essentially. And she like, does
basically the Billy Crystal run, right? Kind of like exactly the same thing. Like, there's no necessary deadline. There's no necessary timing. It's just like, this is the moment that I realize I should not be leaving. and I should be with the person that I want to be with. And then she decides to do it. It's the exact same setup.
Yeah, and I think it's a contrast to early in the movie. Like, she just wants to go home. She's like, what am I doing here? This is, like, out of character for me. Fuck it. And then by the end, she's come this, like, has made her emotional journey. It's like, you know what? This is my life. So I can decide to stay. I don't need to, like, meet this exactly imposed deadline. Like, it doesn't... She's a complete workaholic anyway. She can spare a few extra days and something will be possible. And I mean, it's not like, I mean, of course, I know that people who work in Hollywood generally need to be in LA mostly for like networking reasons, but it's not out of the question for someone like her to also work remotely for
totally
a while.
Established, right? She has
or just
her
take
studio.
A fucking sabbatical. It doesn't matter. She can have her. She has enough money to buy a fucking house in Surrey and have a studio there, like, and go back and forth all the time. Like, this is the thing. Like, because we assume like Jude Law has 2 little girls, he wouldn't uproot them and go to LA. But like, she clearly has the means. She has no, and she doesn't seem to have like a lot of roots in LA, right? Like, I mean, we don't know where her divorced parents even are. We like her workaholic life probably means she only sees her assistants, John Krasinski and Catherine Hahn, all the time,
which is just such a like amazing cast. Like, you have 2 assistants. Okay, who can we get? And of course, at the time in 2006, these are just like, oh yeah, these are good working actors that we know. And now it's just like, it's John Krasinski and Catherine Hahn. It's fun how these things happen.
It's just weird also because I'm literally, you don't do anything. I mean, sure, like, I mean, they might be friends with Nancy Meyers and you just threw them in the movie, but like to a point where they have so little to do that either maybe they cut some of their stuff because it didn't fit in, that I could imagine, because that's what sometimes happens when like still fairly well-known people. I mean, The Office is already on then, isn't it? Like, speaking of John Krasinski.
Yeah, but not
just starting?
for a long time. I think it's
fair.
Like 2005-ish, and then it gets going. I mean, this would be probably like in between seasons, potentially when he doesn't know if it gets picked up.
This is like a day's work. It doesn't matter. He can do this anyway. This is filmed in LA and it's a day's work. The 2 lines he has, like, yeah.
That's why they pay you the big bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Great dialogue, Nancy.
Yep. I mean, to be fair, he is also, and it's complicated. Also not a big part, but like clearly she just likes him or is friends with him or something. So,
I mean, he's a good person to be in a romantic comedy, whether he is the romantic lead or not. He just kind of fits in a universe like that. He should
have not gotten Sexiest Man Alive. Like, his agent clearly paid a lot of money for People magazine to pick him.
Yeah. I mean, like, who cares in the end? Like, people are not going to remember next year, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this sort of went downhill when they made Blake Shelton Sexiest Man Alive. So
I don't even know who that is, so.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know. What else is there to say? I do like that there's a screenwriter in this. Obviously, it's a screenwriter writing a screenwriter, but also that the WGA is in this, right? He's like, his Eli Wallach's journey is that the WGA tries to like constantly honor him and like throw a thing for him because he's like refusing because he's embarrassed that he's not as mobile anymore, and he thinks he would embarrass himself and like 5 people would show up, and like clearly his imposter syndrome. And then Kate Winslet motivates him to do this and starts training with him to like actually be able to walk up the steps, and you know, and obviously a lot of people end up showing up to this thing, and it's a big thing.
It's a cute training montage, not the training montage you typically expect. And you're right, like this is a movie that's very aware of the fact that it's got this LA setting. It's a movie about people who contribute to making movies, right? There's a screenwriter in it. There's a trailer editor in it. There's movie composers in it. So you have various parts of the movie making experience. There's an actress in it that Jack Black dates that are just kind of like present there. What I did like about this was the fact that they kind of concentrate on the movie composer, because that's not a role you often see portrayed, right? Like every other movie that is written by somebody who is writing a movie about Hollywood has like a writer in it. It's just a very obvious self-insert. The movie composer thing I thought was really kind of nice. Also,
or the editor, right? I mean, how often you see editors, and especially people who do trailers, like essentially do like the marketing part of it in a way. And so it's fun.
Still, I mean, that's still funny to me, like that, like being a trailer editor, which obviously is somebody's job, right? But that's like a highly paid, super great job.
Yeah,
it's just weird.
Sure
I'm not entirely sure.
True.
Yeah.
Honestly,
the big bucks, yeah. Because like if you're a good editor, sure, but
if you're a good film editor, I'm not even sure they earn as much, like compared to the director or something. Even on a big project, I'm sure they're well enough compensated, but like on a whole, like there's so many editors out there who just do very basic TV editing, and it's a great job. It's a completely invisible job to most people, so I think it's great, but like it's still I think it's a bit exaggerated.
Yeah, I mean, everything's a bit of a fantasy, right? Jude Law is also an editor, like a book editor, and which is kind of realistic.
He lives in a massive fucking house.
Although that's kind of explained by the fact that his family was also in the business. Maybe when book editing was more
Random House.
Yeah, they own a Random House and also Random House.
Yeah. Or I mean, we also don't know what his wife did. Maybe his wife was loaded. I don't know, but
I mean, we can explain these things away easily enough. They're not disturbing the movie. Sometimes these things are so incongruous that you watch the movie and you just keep asking, like, how does this person live in this house? How does this make sense? In this case, I'm fine with it. I'm fine accepting it. It's a weird, specific job being trailer editor. And that is one of the things I said. I have almost no notes on this. One of the things that really tripped me up, and it trips me up every time, is that Cameron Diaz, because she's the trailer editor, has kind of like this meta commentary on her storyline by like a trailer voice narrator with like trailers, basically fake trailers that she plays in her head, cut to the things that she's doing. And there's no equivalent for that for Kate Winslet. And I thought that was a little bit weird because it feels like they have an equal part in this movie, right? They're both the kind of the female leads. They swap houses. They're like 50-50. And it feels like Kate Winslet should have had something. They kind of hint at it with her having a voiceover at the beginning. But that also goes away. This is, by the way, one of my gripes with movies like this. They do this in a lot of movies. They do it also in Hot Frosty, which we're going to discuss, where we start off with a voiceover and then it just kind of like leads you somewhere and it says some vague thing about love and destiny. And then that's it. It just kind of stops. There's nothing to it. It's not necessary. It's a weird way to use a voiceover.
I mean, I always think that this is probably one of the things where there's a draft of the script that uses this way more heavily, and then there's notes upon notes upon notes, and like drafts upon drafts upon drafts, and then remnants of it remain. And I mean, the trailer voice is funny enough that they probably wanted to keep it in it, but like it's so inconsistent. It appears like 2 or 3. It appears in the beginning.
Yeah.
When she's questioning herself, and it's back just at the end when she comes back, so at least it works as this frame between the two scenes.
Yeah, although it comes like 2 or 3 times, it comes in like at least partially where she kind of like stops herself from it. Yeah. And also you get the trailer voice in the actual which, can we talk about the trailer? I love the trailer with Lindsay Lohan and James Franco in Deception. Which
Christmas
Day, the action movie you want to see on Christmas Day, which is pretty funny. Like I like that. It's not played as a joke, but it is a pretty funny joke.
Yeah, it's clearly like a trashy action movie that they're trying to sell on Christmas because of Die Hard kind of thing. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Which is it is a lot of fun.
I mean, I think it also works with the Hollywood, obviously, the bit of the meta. Like, the trailer is a bit of a meta. Eli Wallach talking about what a meet cute is. Like, that she doesn't know as a term, but he explains it to us. I do also think that a lot of people only know what a meet cute is because of this movie.
It was explained to them, yeah. We should do like one of those Google searches where you see how often the term is used and if it goes up after 2006.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't have it here. I can not hold it a camera, but like I bought some merch of a rival podcast of ours. I don't want to say rival; it's just another rom-com podcast. What is it? I forgot what they're called, but they also do rom-coms, and they did their own merch, and it's actually really nice quality. And they did some merch for You've Got Mail and some merch for the holiday, and they just have a cap now that says "Meet Cute." And they also have a T-shirt with like the Santa Ana wins, which also is always something that I always think of the movie now whenever there's Santa Anas, and I've been to LA when there was Santa Anas. But so far nobody has delivered a man to my front door during Santa Anas.
Also, the Santa Anas are a little bit of a. You'd think there's more to it, right? It's Jack Black pointing out that it's the Santa Anas and that crazy things can happen, and the crazy things that happen is like that over time she gets to know Jack Black better. It feels like underdeveloped.
She's turning her whole life around in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, but still, like in terms of like this being a big thing, I love that though. That the Santa Anas thing, like using that, has become such a trope as well. Because in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, there's like a whole, I think there's like a whole musical number because of this. And I don't think that would be there if this hadn't led to it.
I mean, maybe. I think it's also just a thing that people are very familiar with because they're all from LA. Like everyone who writes TV and film is either from LA or like lives in LA and has lived in LA for way too long. So like for them, it's like a thing to reference, right?
Yeah.
But also, I mean, we should put, it is one of the only like rom-coms that actually does also use LA in as a setting, right? I mean, we've had Valentine's Day that does it, but like the Hollywood setting. I mean, Hollywood does Hollywood enough, like there's La La Land, all of these things, but like sort of as a more casual rom-com setting, it's still not as, not as
I mean, Pretty Woman does it very specifically, like referencing that it's kind of like the land of dreams, which, by the way, also kind of like a kind of one of those things where like there's a little bit of a voiceover with the land of dreams thing, but that does come back then in the end in Pretty Woman, and it doesn't here. And again, like I complain, like I don't like this kind of asymmetry, and like I understand that probably there are reasons, like as this goes through production where you're like, oh, we got to lose this. Oh, this thing it's already 2 hours, right? This is not a short movie. Yeah. It's running 2 hours. Let's cut something here. I understand it. It doesn't sit well with me.
I wanna see like the director's cut, because I do think Nancy Meyers is one of those people who probably always shoots way too much. And then
I'm assuming there's like 140
like
minutes
Curtis. Richard Curtis also at least has a half an hour to an hour too much every time.
I think Love Actually was at first like 3 hours or so.
Yeah.
Which, like, it has so many stories. I also
get it with like so many storylines, but like Nancy Meyers has that tendency to do it. Another word we learn from Eli Wallach is gumption. I think that it is also something I think about a lot. Like, I think that's just like, he just sticks with me. I also love like, put. Yeah. And I mean, I think that actually the most heartening scene of the whole movie is also just when Kate Winslet finally gets a chance to tell off her awful situationship, because when she stops responding to him, he suddenly shows up, which is very typical of this kind of emotional blackmailing asshole of like, oh, I missed you, and then like, so what does that mean? Are you no longer like getting married? And he's like, sort of, well, yeah, like,
it's also fun because he's played by Rufus Sewell, and whenever you see Rufus Sewell, you're like, something's off with you. Like from the moment you meet him, which poor Rufus Sewell, maybe he just gets that in his private life as well. But when you see him in screen, like, you're not just one thing, right? There's another shoe that's gonna drop, and then the shoe drops, and him coming to LA is like, I don't know, I find it somewhat like unrealistic. On the other hand, like, he really wants to control her, so it does make sense.
And he also,
but it's also kind of an annoying thing. It's an annoying thing that then she has to deal with, right? It's her character arc to basically tell him to buzz off.
Yeah, and it's great because she gets to like do that, and that's the thing everyone who's been with someone like this wants to do. And I mean, she tries early on. She even like texts him to say like, "We both know that I need to fall out of love with you," but like he completely also ignores that, right? Like just oversteps the boundaries.
That's what she says. Yeah,
and she's just like keeps violating her boundaries. Up to the point where he stands outside of her front door then, because he has the address, because he sent his manuscript over at some point. And because he's annoyed that she doesn't just edit his fucking manuscript, because she actually has a life now. So, and I mean, it's a fucking holidays. Like, he just expects her to do, like, notes on his manuscript.
It feels not unlike academia, I'm just saying. Like,
yeah. But... No, Kate Winslet is very busy becoming a doodle prodigy, which is also a line. You're a doodle prodigy when like
prodigy.
What I like keeps singing the score.
Yeah, what I like about the way that this is put together, and I really kind of think it is down to the fact that it's two storylines, is that the pacing is never too fast and it's never too slow. It's like the reason you can put this movie on in the background, the reason you can keep coming back to it is so perfectly paced. Like there's always something going on, but it never has these like deep emotional rifts where you're like, oh no, don't do this to me, right? You kind of know where it's going. You know that everybody's going to deal with their shit eventually, and it's perfectly put together, which I also probably, because they edited out like a couple of scenes that might have helped us understand things better. But like the pacing is it's just so on point, which I don't usually notice with movies. You just kind of notice when they drag or when they're like, oh yeah, this is an hour and a half, we had to fit it in. This is a 2-hour movie that just really kind of flies by.
I also think that another important millennial moment in this is Cameron Diaz singing very badly to Mr. Brightside in her bedroom.
And dancing to Jealousy, right? She has some good music related moments. Yeah.
No, that's Mr. Brightside. The song is called Mr. Brightside.
For my whole life I thought that song was called Jealousy.
Jesus, where have you been in 2000? But I mean, the song is fairly new at that point, I think.
I mean, maybe I just always heard it on the radio and nobody told me that that's what it was called. I don't know.
Mr. Brightside. It is a millennial anthem. You're probably millennial.
No, everybody was into the Killers. I just never understood or got into the Killers. Like, look,
because you weren't 14 at the time when this album came out. But
that's not like I was in my 20s. People around me were into it.
Yeah, I know. Lot. It's like very emo. When is that album from? I want to say 2004, 2005.
Yeah, not knowing a Killers song title is very much me. Like I don't know anything about the Killers. I don't know where they're from.
Is like a whole Las Vegas. They are from Las Vegas, believe it or not.
If you put a gun at my head, I would have thought they were from like London or something, just because it sounds like that.
They have a clearly like British indie influence, but they are actually from Las Vegas.
Yeah, look, my Spotify or my Apple Rap thing is like 4
exactly right.
People.
Hot Fuzz is 2004, and that is there. Like that's what Mr. Brightside is on. So it was established enough that a lot of people had screamed in their bedrooms to it. So when they've been wronged by someone, probably at 14, where that didn't actually matter. But like I've been there. We've all been there.
Except for me, apparently, because I still didn't know what the song was.
Yeah, we missed out on this key experience of screaming your lungs out to Mr. Brightside, or in a club. Like it's one of those.
I mean, that I actually might have done, because like that's a typical situation where the song would come on and you would just sing along to it and you wouldn't know what it's called and nobody would tell you. That I think is a much likelier experience for me. Anyway, it's fun seeing her dance around. She's really giving it her all. I kind of want to see the behind the scenes of Cameron Diaz dancing. Either it must have been a really fun day or a really horrible day. I don't think there's any in between.
Yeah. But what is also, I think, remarkable about Jack Black, who in 2006 is mostly like he had his breakout with School of Rock, which I think is 2003 or so.
Yeah, something like that.
And but like he isn't the go-to romantic lead. Like he's like, for Hollywood standards, he is quote unquote fat. Like he's and there's been so much discussion about, like, I mean, with so much, but like sort of in my social media bubble, even over the last few years, whenever people come back to this movie over the holidays, there's been a lot of discussion specifically about that, especially because of like incel guys who's like, oh, women want a man, like, what is it, in trust fund, you know, like in finance, like that kind of like suit wearing, goes to the gym kind of thing. And like, no, we want Jack Black in The Holiday, you're a fucking idiot. Like, I mean, or Jude Law in The Holiday, but like, but like also Jack Black specifically, because it's like, it's not just about like this ideal weird muscle man superhero body type thing that I think also neither, I mean, Jude Law is clearly very fit, but like, it's also not like Chris Hemsworth in, you know, like that.
And you see them naked in bed. He just looks like a regular guy, right? Like he doesn't look, which is like another thing that sometimes you have kind of like in the post 2010s Hollywood movies, like everybody's body is just sculpted. And if it's not usually, then you're getting it there by the day you film. Like, right. That's exactly where it is. And Jude Law is just like, nope, I'm just this British bloke. That's where you're gonna get.
I mean, he's still very, very, very pretty, but like having Jack Black in there is definitely, it's just the whole thing of like, you know, why do we like him? Because he's funny and because he's creative and he actually shows up and he said he would show up. Like, those are like way up there, reliable, emotionally available, and funny. Are like way above goes to the gym, like, you know. And I mean, of course, in this case, yes, he also has money and he has a career and whatever. But like, I don't think this is what we're supposed to like about
fundamentally
him.
Both kind of nice guys, like the way that they're portrayed, and not like in the kind of like toxic way, right? In the way that they're actually like, these are people that you would want to be friends with, right? Even if you're not romantically into them, they're perfectly fine people to be around. You see this with Jude Law also with his friends in the pub, and apparently he's flirting with all the women there, which I mean, that's kind of like his whole fuckboy image from the beginning of the movie. But Jack Black as well, right? Immediately kind of like hanging out with the old Hollywood people. And it's just, these are people you want around because they're interesting and fun people.
Yeah, and he doesn't like, why do you hang out with this old fart? He's like, oh my god, you're hanging out with Arthur Abbott. Like, that's so cool. Like, I can learn from these guys. Like, I mean, in this case also, that like when they have a Hanukkah party and it's like, what does he say when it's like, since when did you just go to temple? Like, what was it? Like, since I last saw you, like, did you convert? But yeah, I mean, it's the thing, right? And he's just like, he's slightly awkward, but he's charming about it. Like, it's like, oh, accidental boob grace, like, you know, this kind of thing. And it's just, it just works. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and then we kind of like culminate in that scene where they all like meet at New Year's Eve and are at the giant, beautiful country home of Jude Law. But it all is very nice, and it's kind of a cute little party that they have with the kids there, and everybody seems to get along. It is kind of an ultimate fantasy in a way, but kind of one that isn't, you know, it's not like the you know, kings and queens in a castle kind of fantasy. It's like you could imagine that happening to you kind of fantasy, which is really what rom-coms traffic in the best.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, it's the cliche of like, oh, these people in their creative jobs with their fancy homes.
That's John Krasinski wearing the John Kerry 2004 sweater. Really, I really cracked up at that because it's 2006.
It also feels very Nora Ephron in a way of like having this random, like, not explicitly, like if it were Nora Ephron, they would have some throwaway line about voting for Kerry, but it's sort of in the air, like, it's there
clearly.
So by the way, what is wrong with critics? Like, I mean, it's like, if you go by the Rotten Tomatoes score, it has 80% on the popcorn meter, which is decent. This is fine. I almost expected it to be higher, but it only has 51 for like critics.
I never know if this is
reviews.
mostly weighted for critics when it came out, or if it's like there's been like a reassessment. I never know what to do with the critics score.
It's both. Like if you go through them on their website, you see there's like after, because it's one of those mainstay movies where it gets reviewed almost every year, and podcasts like ours do it, and
which is I think what also doesn't do Love Actually any favors. That's kind of why that probably
obviously
tanked.
not. The Independent is some asshole at the Independent. I'm so sorry, but like you begin to suspect that Meyers isn't actually a movie director at all, but a features coordinator at a World of Interiors. And I'm like, no, this is a very well put together movie. Like, what have you been watching? Like, you don't need to like a rom-com, but like, you in what world is this not like a well directed movie?
I have like my general problem with movie criticism is either it's fanboyism or it's we need to be overly critical of things.
Yeah.
I need to be smart and funny more than the movie is, and there's very few movie critics that just kind of like do the Roger Ebert thing of, like, I saw a lot of movies, this was good about it, this was bad about it, and go watch it.
Honestly, like and TV criticism is even worse because you have to do it weekly, and that's been my gripe for the last year or so after I've started to follow like TV criticism more closely. But more Roger Ebert, and like we keep coming back to like I don't know what this is after him.
No, right? I think he's around. He's definitely, because like Roger Ebert was like.
I mean, the page also still exists. Right?
No, that was definitely, he was alive. He was writing at that time. I'm not sure if he reviewed this movie, but he definitely reviewed movies into like the late 2000s for sure. I remember it was a Twitter thing because he was on Twitter when he died. Like that was a thing. So that must have been like late 2000s,
he also
early
died
2010s.
prematurely, right? Because he had a cancer tumor.
Thing. Yeah.
I unfortunately can't find an immediate review that he actually wrote on this, unfortunately. Because it would have been interesting.
Maybe we can find that and put it in the show notes. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm on the page and this isn't there for some reason.
He didn't review all the movies for sure.
No. He reviewed My Best Friend's Wedding. We didn't look at that. But yeah.
That's the thing that I kind of wanted to bring over from our discussion on My Best Friend's Wedding, which kind of introduces us to Cameron Diaz as the likable foe, like to Julia Roberts' character, and everything that makes her endearing in that movie, she just completely carries over into this one. Like, this is the thing that struck me the most when I rewatched it this time, is how incredibly likable Cameron Diaz somehow is. She doesn't really need to start off that way. Like her LA part when she's like workaholic woman with her assistants cutting the trailers, and like when she has the very kind of funny fight with her cheating boyfriend. She's funny. She's feisty. She's not necessarily like your favorite kind of like adorable rom-com heroine, and she becomes really kind of the embodiment of almost the Efron rom-com heroine, which makes you almost kind of think like, oh, like I wonder what Cameron Diaz and Nora Ephron would have done together, which obviously, I mean, that didn't happen, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of sad because we talked about this before we recorded, but like Cameron Diaz sort of took an intentional sabbatical that I think has always lasted a decade.
And she's in like some action movie now, like,
I think she picked something that she wanted
something
to do.
With Jamie
something.
Foxx. Yeah,
I mean, she thankfully sort of came of age as an actress where she probably still gets decent enough residuals from things, so she doesn't need to work, and then obviously also made good salaries. So I totally like support her just saying, look, I'm getting to an age where all they offer me is bullshit, so I might as well not. And I mean, this is probably a position of luxury that more people should take, like, especially if she started working very young as well. Like, I mean, as I said, my best friend's wedding.
She's a household name in the 90s, right? She's born in the 70s. She's a household name in the 90s, right? She's a star in her 20s. She's
in her early 20s. Yeah, I mean, one of the earliest things, like The Mask, I think, and something about
95.
Mary. And
she must have been like 23, 22, 23 for The Mask, right? She has been working at this point.
And I mean, I think the thing with Winslet obviously is like Winslet is still around. She also starts young, but like she turned herself into a proper like character actress, right? She stopped sort of doing the rom-com thing. She's done a lot of like Oscar bait movies and has also been nominated and won by now, right? So she clearly went that route, whereas Cameron Diaz, I mean, I'm not saying she wouldn't have had the chops, but maybe this is also not what she got offered, so she's just stopped, right? So it's again that whole age-old story of like what happens with actresses once they pass the age of 35 in Hollywood, and the answer is either they manage to get some gritty parts and work with the right directors, or they sort of disappear, or they, at least in this case, she disappeared sort of intentionally to a point because she was like, well, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, we might complain that we didn't see her in more things. On the other hand, Julia Roberts has kept working pretty solidly, and like I'm looking at all of her movies, and like the ones that really stick with me the most are like the 90s, 2000s rom-coms. Yeah. So I'm not sure we would have gotten more of that Cameron Diaz that we're seeing in The Holiday.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Maybe like now that rom-coms are coming back, I could see her having like the older part in a rom-com.
I mean, Nancy Meyers is right there.
Yeah, I mean Nancy Meyers, but the thing we're coming back to this, Nancy Meyers wanted to finally do a rom-com again, and then Netflix cut the project.
Yeah,
because she's too expensive for a rom-com, and I'm like, you pay for so much bullshit, sure. But yeah. It's, anyway, like, unfortunately, there's not been, The Holiday is clearly one of the modern classics, I want to say, of rom-com, and there hasn't really been a holiday since then, right? There hasn't been one of those. Especially not, like, one of those seasonal ones you want to keep putting on in the same way you want to keep putting on Nora Ephron's movies.
Yeah, and like Love Actually, and of course we've talked about this frequently, right? The thing that kind of filled that hole is like the reruns and like the Hallmark type movies, right? Like almost being a seasonal rom-com became associated with one brand and with it not usually being a very good movie. And so for a while it kind of just went away.
I feel like the Hallmark ones and the Netflix ones, there's such a volume of them now that they're clearly thrown out there for like this 1 year, and then you sort of binge watch most of that roster or like a few of that roster through the season and never return to them because they're not good enough to go back the next year. I think one of the only ones that we're not doing this season that we might do next year is Single All the Way. It's one of the only ones from that sort of roster that I've now watched, I think 3 times, because I also watched it yesterday, because it's good enough and cute enough and like well acted enough for me to want to sort of put it on while I'm writing my Christmas cards or whatever, in the same way I would put on The Holiday. Even though they're not comparable in like the craftsmanship of movie making, but they're well written enough, and there's charming enough for me to want to revisit it. And there's hardly been anything like this. I mean, even some of the Hallmark ones we did last year, they were good enough for that moment of like, we can talk about this on the podcast, and I enjoyed watching it one time. I might watch it again once if I'm really looking for some, but there's also so many of them, so that you might as well just watch the new one, right? Exactly. It doesn't feel necessary to rewatch them, and it feels like we kind of are either like in a rut where we don't have enough of them, or we have so many that it really kind of becomes a chore to filter out the few good ones. And we kind of should be settling somewhere in between, where there's like maybe 4 Netflix holiday movies per year that you can, where like maybe one of them becomes a classic instead of, I don't know how many we've already had. Honestly, I also can't tell because Netflix keeps showing me, and like the other streamers keep showing me movies I've already seen. And sometimes I'll like click on it and like I'll be like 3 minutes in and I'm like, oh no, I've seen this. It's not good enough for me to see it again. So yeah. There's been enough of them that I started and stopped after 10 to 15 minutes, and it's still like, that is something that has gotten way more common over the last few years for me than it's ever been. I mean, it might also just be having seen more things and having sort of, I don't want to say like taste in the sense of I have very acquired taste. No, but I have a taste for what I specifically like about something, and I don't, and I've seen enough movies to know that now. Whereas when I was 15, I probably just put something on and like You know, when I was still developing, like I was still figuring out what I actually like and what I enjoy about movies. Whereas now I might just be more critical of it and go like, ugh, whatever. But it's still, I think it also definitely has to do with the quality of like, do I actually want to devote even the 90 minutes those Christmas things take?
And I mean, sometimes the couple of extra millions that Nancy Meyers doesn't get now that she did get then really do make a difference in terms of being very on point, not just for the story, but also for the set design, for having enough days to shoot this. So you don't have to go with the one scene where everybody was okay, but you can wait until everybody gets it perfect. I think that's stuff that on the back end actually does matter. And we haven't been getting that much of it.
No, like, because the Hallmark thinks they shoot within a couple weeks if they're on location. If they're not on location, then it's probably a fucking week, right? It's like shooting an episode of TV. And and you can just tell, like, even if you have decent, talented people, like, it's, you know, it's
and you can see that mostly in these Hallmark movies, the people who are doing them are like, I mean, they do Hallmark movies, but they're also like, a lot of them are TV actors who are used to kind of working fast or like soap actors, like people who know to work in that way. And they're always, you know, good in a workman like fashion, but like, they're not the actors who will, you know, they're not your Meryl Streeps who will spend weeks and weeks in preparation for this, and they can't afford to.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And there's only a few people who can work in this sort of environment and actually deliver above board performances. In this kind of setting, especially also if the script is weak. Like, an actor can only do so much if the script is that bad. But there's like a few people in this like Netflix Christmas movie circle. Like, I mean, I keep coming back to Luke McFarlane because he's done both Hallmark and Netflix Christmas movies, and we've also talked about him in Bros. And he's one of the only people that I always like watching. Like, he just has something, and he can turn it on, and he can work in this environment, and he doesn't even need that good a script. I just like looking at him, and he draws me in.
Yeah, but like, still, like, even in comparison with that, Jude Law, I'd rather watch Jude Law. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, I mean, it's Jude Law and Jack Black and all of these people, but also not enough movies had Eli Wallach, and I forget when he passed away. Probably not that long after 2006. Let me look this up. But he was a gem. And I don't think he's done enough of this stuff. Like, it is a career. I mean, it will also be a physical thing. And, he made it in 2014. He died at age 98.
All right. Yeah, that's a good run.
And I think this is also the perfect person because, he lived almost 100 years. He really was around in old Hollywood. He was born in 1915. He's like Dick Van Dyke, basically, who's also still around now.
Yeah. That's one of the weirdest, I have to say, one of the weirdest thing, because when I was a kid growing up and we would watch Mary Poppins pretty regularly, and like both of those people are still around, and like they were, to me as a kid, old then, and it's just weird to see. And it was an old movie, right? They were old then, and the movie was already like 20, 30 years old at that point in time. It's just kind of like one of those time-bendy things that gets you.
Yeah. I dread the day when Dick Van Dyke dies. I mean, he will have lived a very full life, but
yeah. Anyway, let's not end on a down note. We should talk about
taglines. I looked it up. I can't find one for this.
I haven't found one either, but I also didn't look very closely because you're usually the tagline person.
Yeah. Well, do you have a fake one?
Yeah, I don't. It's meta and it's not that good. It's when the trailer is your life, make the life your movie. Which I don't know. It's not a real tagline, but I feel like it kind of fits with the whole vibe.
Stop acting like the best friend in your own life.
I mean, it kind of goes in the same direction. Like it's
because I feel like that's also Cameron Diaz, right? Even though they say it to Kate Winslet, but to a certain degree, it's herself too. Like she doesn't live, like she doesn't live her life. She has her career, but like that's her one thing.
All right. The Holiday. It's a great movie to watch around the holidays. And it holds up to a rewatch.
Exactly. But you already
times.
knew this.
But you already knew this. And if not, then we can confirm.
If you watch this for the first time because of this podcast, please let us know, because I don't think that happens. But let us know. I believe it with like smaller things we've done. We also want to know about that, by the way. If you're one of 3 people who watch Super Bob because of this, like in the world, but also the one person because of this podcast, I want to know. But if it's for something like the holiday, I will be amazed. So if you're still here, let me know.
Maybe we moved last year some people to finally watch Love Actually after they heard all the bad commentary about it and how it's a bad movie.
And then they probably hated it and now they stopped listening to
Which is
it.
fine.
We'll see. Anyway.
All right. That's the holiday.